The prairie was the kind of empty that pressed on a man's ribs. The horizon lay wide and merciless, a scarlet line where the sun bled itself out, and the wind hissed through broken sage like a whisper too tired to raise its voice. The rancher sat tall in the saddle, his back aching from long days and longer nights. Dust clung to his beard, and his horse, lathered and stumbling, pulled slow against the reins. He was thinking only of home, of the stove's faint heat and the silence that always greeted him there. A man could grow used to silence, he told himself. Silence didn't betray you. Silence didn't turn its eyes away in pity. Then, on the ridge where the trail dipped into a shallow creek bed, his horse shied. The animal's ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring as though it smelled something foul in the evening air. The rancher narrowed his gaze, his weathered eyes searching the ground. At first, he thought it nothing more than a rag of cloth abandoned by some drifter. But as the wind tugged at it, the fabric shifted, revealing a shape beneath. He dismounted with a grunt, boots sinking into dry dust. The world seemed to hold its breath. He crouched and tugged the edge of the blanket. The bundle moved. He jerked back, hand flying the revolver at his hip. But then came the sound, thin as a dying flame, no louder than the breeze itself. Just kill me fast. The rancher froze. His fingers hovered above the gun, but he did not draw. Slowly, with caution carved into every line of his body, he knelt again and pulled back the blanket. Beneath lay a woman, broken as if the land itself had tried to bury her. Her face was swollen, one eye closed with blood crusted at the corner. Her skin, where it showed through torn dress and dirt, was marred by bruises that told of merciless hands. She was half conscious, lips cracked, but her gaze, when it found him, burned with a startling clarity. "Go on," she rasped, breath hitching. "Do it quick." The rancher staggered back a step. The words felt heavier than a rifle slug. He had seen death plenty, had buried neighbors and kin alike, but never had he been asked to deliver it by one so unwilling to beg for anything else. He cleared his throat, though his voice came rough. "I ain't about to put a bullet in you." Her eyes flickered, and for a moment, disappointment seemed sharper than pain. "Then leave me. Don't drag this out." A silence stretched. Coyotes yipped far off, their cries curling in the cooling air. He looked at her, at the way her hands twitched like a trapped bird's wings, at the stubborn refusal to weep. Something in her face stirred an old ache in him, a memory of another body broken by men's cruelty, one he had been too late to save. He pushed the thought aside. "No," he said finally, firm as a fence post. "Not leaving you, not killing you. You'll come with me." Her head rolled against the dirt, and she let out a dry laugh, little more than a cough. "Fool." The rancher slipped his arms beneath her. She was lighter than she looked, all bone and blood and stubborn breath. When he lifted, she gasped, a sound sharp enough to make him flinch, but she did not cry out again. He wrapped the blanket tighter around her and carried her to the horse. The animal tossed its head uneasily, but the rancher muttered low, steady words. He mounted with difficulty, holding her against him, her weight slumped but oddly fierce, as though even unconscious she refused to yield fully. The prairie stretched endless ahead, a wide sheet of shadow swallowing what light remained. Each hoofbeat drummed against the earth like a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. At first, she didn't stir. Then, as the night deepened, her breath warmed against his chest, and her words came again, so faint he thought them dream murmurs. "They'll come. You don't understand. They'll come for me." He glanced down, but her eyes were closed. Sleep, fever, or fear? He couldn't tell which gripped her. He only knew the truth of her tone, the way it slipped past his defenses and lodged like a thorn under skin. The rancher rode on, his face grim against the wind. The stars bled out across the black sky. Coyotes trailed their laughter closer now, circling unseen. The horse stumbled once, nearly throwing them both, but the rancher tightened his grip, refusing to let her slip from his arms. Every mile felt longer than the last. He imagined the cabin's lantern waiting for him, the crackle of fire. Yet even that thought seemed thinner now, as if the woman's presence had torn some seam in his world, letting in shadows that would never leave. Near midnight, she stirred again. Her voice was raw, but her words clear enough. You should have done what I asked. He kept his gaze fixed on the horizon, where darkness pressed down like a weight. Maybe, but I didn't. The horse carried him into the night, its hooves striking sparks from hidden stones. Behind them, the wind rose stronger, sweeping across the plains. It sounded to him like a warning, though no man could say from where or from whom. The rancher did not look back. The cabin crouched against the dark like a tired animal, logs blackened by weather and years. The rancher pushed the door open with his shoulder, carrying her across the threshold. Inside, the air smelled of ash and old timber, a scent that had become his companion more faithfully than any man. He laid her down on the narrow bed. The blanket fell aside, and her body shivered though the room was warm from a fire smoldering in the hearth. He poured whiskey into a tin cup, then into a rag, and began cleaning the cuts on her face. She winced but kept her jaw tight, teeth clenched. The rancher watched her eyes, the way they refused to close, as though she would not give him even the dignity of blindness while he worked. "Hold still," he muttered. Her voice rasped low, broken by pain but sharp with defiance. "Why? So you can keep me breathing longer than I asked?" He paused, the rag heavy in his hand. The fire cracked, sparks leaping. "Because no one deserves to be left like that." Her lips curved, not a smile, but a grimace that mocked the word. She turned her head, refusing the whiskey he offered. He left the cup by the bedside anyway. Hours bled into one another. Outside, rain began to fall, striking the roof with a soft, relentless rhythm. The rancher sat in a chair by the fire, hat tipped low, watching her. She drifted in and out of fever dreams, muttering half-sentences that broke against the silence like stones cast into deep water. "Don't let them find me." Horse's breath in the dark. Blood on the porch. Could have washed it clean. The rancher said nothing. He had lived long enough to know the dead sometimes spoke through the mouths of the half-living, and it was best to let them speak. Still, each fragment clawed at him, pulled threads in his mind until shapes began to form. When her eyes opened again, clear for the first time since he found her, he asked softly, "Who's coming after you?" She stared at him, and in that stare was a wall higher than stone, a refusal so strong it nearly became a confession. She shook her head, then turned her gaze to the fire. The rancher leaned back, sighing. "Fine, keep your secrets. But if trouble rides this way, it's my land it'll ride on to." The rain deepened. The wind pressed hard at the shutters, and the prairie beyond seemed to groan under the storm. The rancher fed another log into the flames. The woman's eyes followed his movements, tracing the lines of his weathered hands. "Why are you alone here?" she asked suddenly. He kept his focus on the fire, as though the flames had answers she could not twist. "Land doesn't ask questions. It takes all a man has and gives just enough back to keep him hoping. That's enough company for me." She studied him, her face pale in the firelight, every bruise deepened by shadow. "You've lost someone." The words landed heavy. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. Silence was confession enough. The storm grew louder, a hollow moan around the cabin. Her breathing grew shallow, and she curled beneath the blanket. He thought she had slipped back into sleep when her voice came again, softer now, almost childlike. "You should have done what I asked." The rancher turned, eyes dark beneath the brim of his hat. "And I'll keep not doing it." For a long time, the only sound was the rain. Toward dawn, the storm eased. The prairie smelled of wet earth, and mist clung to grass outside. The rancher stepped out, boots sinking into mud, scanning the horizon the way men do when they feel eyes on them. Hoof prints marked the softened ground by the fence line, fresh and sharp. His cattle stirred nervously in the pasture, their lowing restless. He returned inside with the damp still clinging to his coat. She was awake, propped weakly on one elbow. Her gaze flicked to his face, then to the rifle in his hand. "You saw them," she said, voice flat. "I saw tracks." Her jaw tightened. "It's not the storm you need to be fearing." "Then who?" She sank back against the pillow, shaking her head. "They won't stop. Not till I'm buried or dragged back to where I ran." The rancher's knuckles whitened on the rifle stock. He had built this place with sweat and years, fenced the land post by post, fought drought and wolves and rustlers, all to carve out a corner apiece. Now this broken woman had landed in the middle of it, bringing shadows with her. "Whatever devils you've stirred up," he said slowly, "they'll find me standing between them and you." Her eyes widened, the first true crack in her composure. "Why, you don't even know my name." "Don't need it." The words hung heavy, final. That night, as the fire burned low, the wind pressed against the shutters again. Not like the storm before, but steady, deliberate. The rancher rose, rifle in hand, listening. Each creak of the cabin seemed louder than it should. Outside, the coyotes had gone quiet. The woman's whisper drifted through the room, ragged with dread. "They've found me." The rancher did not answer. He stood by the door, listening to the silence beyond, waiting for it to break. The prairie was gray with morning when the rancher saddled his horse and rode the fence line. The woman had fallen back into a fevered doze, her breathing shallow, her body drawn tight beneath the quilt. He left her with a rifle leaned against the wall, though he doubted she had the strength to lift it. Still, some weapons were more comfort than use. The land bore signs of intrusion. Fresh boot prints pressed into damp earth, sharp at the heel. Fence posts were cut where wire had been stretched, as if to test its boundaries. On one plank, a knife had carved a crude symbol, a circle slashed through with a line. The rancher stared at it, his jaw set, then spat into the dirt. Whoever had left it wanted him to know they were close. When he returned, she was awake, eyes glass-bright, tracking his every move. He laid the rifle back beside her and poured coffee into a chipped cup. "They've been here," he said. Her lips pressed together, then parted with a slow breath. "They'll come again, not to scare you, to finish it." The rancher studied her, the gaunt lines of her face, the shadows that refused to leave her eyes. "You gonna tell me who they are?" She didn't answer at first, her gaze fixed on the fire, as though she could burn the truth into silence. But at last, words came, bitter as gall. "They're no gang you'll find in a wanted poster. Just men who do what they please, because no one stops them. I was taken when they raided a camp outside Abilene. Some women vanish quiet. Some scream until their throats tear. I learned to watch, to listen. I learned the way they moved, the way they laughed after killing. And then I saw something I shouldn't have, a quarrel between the two at the top. Secrets meant for no one's ears. After that, I was marked. I slipped away in the dark, but they've been hunting me since." Her words hung heavy, each one a weight pressing into the room. The rancher leaned against the table, coffee forgotten. "They won't forgive it," she whispered. "Men like that, they'd rather burn the whole prairie than let one woman walk free." The rancher rubbed at his beard, eyes narrowing. He had fought rustlers, had driven off wolves, but this was something different. This was blood feud and cruelty, a storm not of nature, but of man. By dusk, the prairie carried a strange stillness. Even the cattle kept close, bunching together in nervous clusters. The rancher loaded rifles, setting them near the windows. The woman, though weak, sat upright, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her gaze was steady. "They'll come at night," she said. "They always do." And she was right. The sound came first, the distant thud of hooves, slow and measured, carrying across the plain like war drums. The rancher doused the lamp. Moonlight spilled silver across the room. He crouched by the window, rifle ready. Figures appeared on the ridge, shadows on horseback, 5, maybe 6. They waited there, still as stones, before one rider loosed a whoop that split the night. Then they charged. The barn was first to go. Torches arced through the dark, bursting into flame where dry hay caught like tinder. The cattle bellowed, crashing against corral. Shots cracked, splintering wood, whistling through the night. The rancher fired back, steady and grim. A rider toppled from his horse, body hitting the ground with a thud that seemed to shake the earth itself. Inside, the woman moved to the second window, her hand shaking as she lifted the rifle. She steadied it against the sill, teeth clenched, and when another shadow swept close, she squeezed the trigger. The man jerked backward, falling hard, his horse fleeing into the dark. Smoke curled in from the barn, acrid and bitter. The woman coughed, covering her mouth. The rancher reloaded with swift, practiced motions. The attackers circled, their shouts echoing. Bullets shattered the glass, slammed into wood, sent splinters raining across the room. Then silence. The rancher's breath was harsh in the stillness, his pulse pounding like a drum. He peered into the dark, but the riders had melted away, leaving only the burning ruin of his barn. The cattle had scattered into the night, their cries fading across the prairie. The woman slumped back against the wall, sweat shining on her brow. She wiped blood from her lip, her hands trembling. "You should have left me," she whispered. The rancher turned, his face lined with smoke and fury. "No, they have come anyway. Sooner or later. Devils like that don't stop at one soul. They spread like fire. Better to face 'em head on." Her eyes met his, and for the first time there was something like respect in them, faint but sharp as flint. Still, her voice shook when she said, "They'll come back, and worse." The rancher looked out at the burning wreckage of his barn, the black smoke rising into the night sky like a signal for every predator on the plains. His land, his livelihood, gone in a single strike. The fire's glow lit his face, carving deep lines, making him look older, harder. "They'll come back," he said quietly. "Then we'll be ready." The woman's gaze lingered on him, her jaw set, her eyes shadowed with something he couldn't yet name. Outside, the barn collapsed with a roar, sparks rushing upward into the night, as though the prairie itself had been marked by war. Inside the cabin, silence fell once more, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence before another storm. Dawn crept slow across the prairie, dragging red light to the smoke that still hung over the ruins of the barn. The rancher stood outside, rifle in hand, his boots blackened with ash. His land smelled of fire and loss, a graveyard for all he had built. The woman watched him from the doorway, wrapped in the blanket like a shroud, her face pale but her eyes awake and sharp. "They'll come again," she said. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The prairie itself carried the truth in its silence. Somewhere out there, 5 riders were gathering, sharpening their knives, loading their guns. He knew they'd ride at dawn, the same way coyotes circle back after a first failed strike. The rancher turned to her. "If you got any strength left, you'll need it now." Her fingers clutched the blanket. "You could still leave me. Take your horse and ride south. You might make it." He studied her, the torn face, the fire that lived in her even when her body faltered. A man can only ride from himself so long. "I'll stand." Something flickered in her gaze, almost grief, almost pride. She nodded once, and that was the end of it. They readied what little they had left. The rancher laid out rifles by the windows, filled the last cartridges into their chambers. The woman insisted on loading her revolver, though her hand shook. She practiced raising it, steadying her breath, then lowered it again, her jaw hard with determination. The prairie brightened with morning. Birds did not sing. The horizon carried only the sound of hooves, slow, deliberate, growing louder with each beat. The woman straightened, her spine rigid against the doorframe. The rancher stepped beside her, the rifle balanced in his arms. On the ridge, 5 riders appeared, their silhouettes black against the rising sun. Dust trailed behind them like smoke. They halted, spread wide across the ridge, as though to cast a shadow over the land itself. The rancher spat into the dirt. "Here they are." The riders descended in silence, hoofs pounding, eyes glinting cold. Their leader, tall in the saddle, wore a long coat that fluttered like a crow's wing. As they drew closer, the woman stiffened, her face drained, her breath shallow. "It's him," she whispered. The rancher glanced at her. "The one who marked you?" Her jaw tightened. "Blood." The leader reined in, close enough now for his face to be seen, a face that echoed hers, the same hard cheekbones, the same black eyes. Recognition struck like a knife. "Brother," she said, the word breaking from her lips as if torn out. The rancher's grip on the rifle tightened. The air between them seemed to shatter into silence, so heavy it pressed against their lungs. The leader's gaze locked on the woman, unreadable, then slid to the rancher. "You're keeping what isn't yours," he called out, voice deep as gravel. The rancher raised his rifle. "I keep what I protect." A grin split the leader's face, cruel and cold. He lifted his hand, and the riders surged forward. The rancher fired first. The shot cracked, echoing across the prairie. One rider pitched from his saddle, body thudding into dust. The others fanned out, rifles spitting flame. Bullets chewed into the cabin walls, shattered windows, tore splinters into the air. The woman fired from the doorway, her revolver steady now, her eyes blazing with something more than fear. Another rider fell, his horse screaming as it bolted. The fight raged in fire and thunder. The rancher moved with grim precision, each shot deliberate, each breath measured. A bullet seared his arm, another tore through his hat, but he stood fast. The woman fought beside him, no longer weak, no longer pleading for death. Her brother's voice cut through the chaos, shouting commands, curses, promises of what he'd do when he had her again. The rancher killed another, leaving two. But the leader rode closer, dismounting with the predator's grace, his coat swirling around him. He drew a knife long as a man's forearm and advanced. The rancher met him in the dirt, rifle empty, swinging it like a club. The clash was brutal, close, a storm of fists and steel. The knife sliced shallow across the rancher's ribs, hot blood spilling down his side. He grunted, swung again, staggering the man but not stopping him. The woman stumbled forward, revolver shaking in her hand. She aimed at her brother, her eyes wide, torn between blood and survival. He turned toward her, knife glinting, and for a moment his face softened, almost tender. "Sister," he said, "come back. You're mine to keep. Always were." She stared at him, her breath coming fast, her body trembling. The rancher, bloodied, half collapsed in the dust, could only watch. Then her hand steadied, her eyes hardened. No. The shot rang out, sharp and final. Her brother jerked, the knife falling from his hand. He crumpled into the dirt, his blood seeping into the prairie. Silence fell. The last rider, seeing his leader dead, turned and fled into horizon, dust trailing behind like smoke from a dying fire. The woman lowered the revolver, her breath ragged. She looked down at the body, eyes wide with the weight of what she had done. Then she turned to the rancher, who leaned heavy against the cabin wall, blood soaking his shirt. "You saved me," she whispered. He shook his head, grimacing. "No, you saved yourself."